It's all you, brother. Let's get started.
Cool. All right, man. Well, look, first, thanks for having me on. This is always good fun. You know that I like to do these events, so it's always good to talk about how to do them rather than just do them as well. So, I've run probably 400, 450 of these. So safe to say I've seen a fair few different types, a fair few that were pretty bad, a fair few that were very bad, and some that were quite good. Hopefully this one will follow suit. So, I've done some live, I've done some recorded, Simulive, all of that stuff and in between. So as we go through this deck, there'll be quite a lot to cover, probably quite a lot of my voice. I'm sorry about that. You might get sick of my accent. I'll try my best to keep it succinct. So let's go forward. We're going to go through what does average look like? Because truth be told, most people just achieve average at the minute. Most webinars are just kind of, 6 out of 10, maybe at push. Some of them get to a 7. No one really gets to an 8, 9, and a 10 that often. It's rare that I've seen that. I don't proclaim to tell you how to get to a 10, but getting toward that at least is a better step. Your market dictates what is a 10 and what is not in every other market. We'll go through some structures and formats and some tools that you can use to help you achieve those. A couple of them might be a bit more of a like advanced if you've got a bigger team type of thing, and a couple of them might be just easier to do if you're doing, for instance, a live Zoom like this. Some different promo strategies which might be pretty fun to try out. Maybe you've seen these, maybe you haven't. So pressure on me to deliver something new and what you can do in and after the webinar to try and make the very best of the people watching it. Because if I don't give you guys anything to take away, what was the point? Is kind of the problem that we're going to get through. So let's carry on. What does standard look like? Now, in the chat, I'm going to pay attention here. What would you normally say happens in a webinar? Like, just give me like a sentence each if you can. What is very normal? For me, I'll try not to give you the answers away, but I see panels of people where they just, like they agree with each other. It's not really an interview. They just discuss a broad topic, maybe a couple of subtopics, and they kind of all medley in. They're way over each other. No one really has a different perspective. And alternatively, kind of like Chris says, the other one I normally see, you get a marketing person who's going to sit and talk for an hour and they read you the slides, literally reading it. So they're going to go, what a standard webinar looks like and why you want to avoid it. And then they move on to the next slide and read that and the bullet points. And it's just painful. And they have 1,000 slides. You don't really learn anything. There's no value in reading back the slides. It's just not fun. So we don't want to do that, hopefully, is the message I'm putting across. So let's get away from that and get into what we can do better. I kind of went through some of them, but a little promotion done is a little added bottom point there. So little promotion, most of the time people just say, we're doing a webinar. They post it on LinkedIn once. They do one email. Maybe it's in a newsletter if you're lucky. They don't promote these things very much. And truth be told, I mean, Richard and I, we haven't had to prepare loads for this. We've done a lot of talking together and we understand what each other would like to say. But, if you've got to make 60 slides, that's a lot of work, like to do something that you're not really going to give the promotion for. So things like that are kind of difficult to see when you've seen hundreds of webinars and you just think, there's no way they're getting the real benefit from that. And of course, when you have a webinar like that, there's not really going to be an obvious takeaway that you, the watcher, the person commenting in the chat is going to take away. What was the point of you coming? What was the point of you spending your time? You didn't change anything about your work because you didn't learn anything you could apply to it. That's no fun. No one wants to do that. So moving forward, some structures and some tools. I'll be honest, I've got my iPad right here. I have scribbled down some notes years ago that I thought were cool webinar formats, and I should probably make it into something a bit better looking than it is, but this has informed a lot of what I do. So these are some of them. I have about 12, and I always come up with more of them. For some reason, I do my thinking late at night and in the shower in the morning. So this is where most of these have come from. But the 3 points of view, the feel good, the battle, the big shot, the ridiculous, and the 10x bigger are types of things that I think you could try. And I'll explain how we go through most of them. 3 points of view is the easiest. Now we could do this right here on the Zoom if we had another speaker. Normally you'd want a host, or you'd want the host to be one of the 3 people. That's perfectly viable, and I've done that plenty of times. You want to do something like a topic that has 3 angles. Now, it's not how to do a webinar, 3 speakers. It would be how to do a webinar that's going to get lots of registrations. person number one in the first 15-minute segment, if you're reading my slides, they're going to take on one part of it. They're going to take on the promotion aspect only on their own. It's kind of like a talk show. You're going to have you guys might know Jonathan Ross, maybe not. Think of Letterman and all of those types of things. You're going to have the first person come on, round of applause, and they're going to talk about their new album or their new movie that they're in. And then there's an ad break, and the next person comes out. Person one moves along on the couch. Next person is the focal point, and they talk for 15 minutes, and then you get the next ad break. Same thing, different topics, all one show. 3 guests equals 3 times the promotion. That's an underlooked thing that you can have with this. And the best bit about it, my favorite, which is sort of intangible, a little bit, you can often get so much more audience retention. So what I keep an eye on here at the bottom of my Zoom, I'm looking at participants, and I hope that the number is going to stay the same. Now, a couple people might dip off. They've got, someone came to the door or need to take a phone call. Happens. But as many of the people that I had at the start, I want to keep to the end. This helps because you get in different voices every 15 minutes. What doesn't happen in that first one, like I said, the medley of people agreeing, you are hearing different voices, but they're all over each other the whole time. Nothing changes. That blends in. It's kind of like listening to a podcast. You kind of zone out after a bit if you're not really paying attention. And that doesn't happen with this one because there's a change. There's a reason for your ears to prick up and go, something different. And you're going to remember that. Battle was pretty fun. I'll say this is for the more brave of you. It doesn't apply to everybody. Now think of a highly contested market, maybe marketing agencies, sales trainers, things like that. You need someone who's got some profile so that it's not just kind of this random in a vacuum event. But for instance, one of the best ones I saw was a sales trainer who I'd worked with called John Barrows, and he had his great friend and basically a competitor directly, Richard Harris. Very similar types of work. Often they'd refer deals to each other, which were or were not a better fit for each other for whatever reason. But they have differing opinions on some things. Now, it wasn't like a really played out cringy boxing match. They didn't try and make it into this whole thing. It was more of like a round based discussion where they'd said, we're going to talk about one thing that we disagree on. We're going to have something we have consensus on, and so on. You kind of get the flavor. One really cool thing you can do here to stoke the fire, you can have a bit of a social back and forth. If that's appropriate in your market, you can have a bit of a LinkedIn debate. You can say, Richard said this about webinars, and here is what I think, which is totally in opposition of what he said. Now, there's a line to that. Let's not be mean about each other. Let's not make it a completely fake drama, because I have seen that and people found it out and they came to the webinar in the end and then they turned off because they realized what a setup it was. But you can have a bit of a discourse. If you do it well enough and it's worth it, you could have a bit of PR about it if you're of that stage of company. For instance, in the sales tech world, Gong and maybe Chorus, they would be brilliant companies to do this. They'll probably never do it. They're too big, but that would be PR worthy. People would watch that. So it's a difficult balance. And Chris says we got to be authentic. Yeah, it's a fun one. We got to add some spice to it, but it's a fun one. The ridiculous, I think this is a better title than it is a concept a little bit, to be honest, but a bit more work up front. You've got to be an investigative journalist. This is something I keep thinking about of late. A lot of content has become kind of stale. I think that you guys will go to any company's blog and you could read the same content anywhere else on any other company's blog. That kind of applies to webinars quite often as well. So to break out from that, if you're not going to have a crazy big guest or 3 points of view or the other things that I'm going to mention in a moment, a ridiculous, maybe investigative find or a journalistic experiment is a different way to do that. More of a storytelling approach. For instance, let's say I ran 30 webinars with 30 different promotion tactics, and this is what I found. That would be a good example of, that's ridiculous. He did that much work. He's going to tell us what the results are. I don't have to do that work to find out the information too. Great. That's a good example. But the main thing, of course, is the title. If you don't have a good title, which reflects really the value of coming to that, no one's going to get it. And then you're going to have wasted all of that A, effort to do the event, B, promote it, but C, more importantly, all of the actual work you did. So kind of better if you can work out, we're doing a study and a survey and use that as the investigative thing, rather than to do custom ad hoc work. Because, like I said, if I'd run 30 webinars just to do this one, I better make damn sure that this one is really good. So there's that. And repurposing afterwards is really, really important. Make the absolute most out of what you've created because you worked very hard for it. Feel good. I mean, everyone loves to put a customer on stage and let them sing and dance. Everyone wants to be, kind of like me right here. This is a feel good for me because I get to talk about a fun thing that I like and that I think I'm good at. Great. Richard basically doesn't have to do anything. It's brilliant. He's clicking on the slides. He's having a great time. He's probably got a beer. Life is good. So that type of thing where you can put a customer on stage and you've got a good story to tell, that's nice. It doesn't always apply for the mass market if you want to promote it to lots of people. It's probably a more lower funnel tactic that you want to implement. Maybe they're better on demand because you could run it live. There's no harm in that. But you're going to get a percentile of your overall reach. You're going to want the people who are kind of considering you, thinking about whether they buy from you. They're seeing your offer about the discount that you've got this quarter, and they're like, oh, okay, I'll see what they said about that customer, and so on. That's why you come to this one. Big shot's pretty fun. It's probably unlikely that most of us are going to do this because it's a big spend, or almost likely unless you have a good friend who's by chance a massive influencer. But I mean, don't think of a marketing influencer because they've got 10,000 followers. Think of like who would open at HubSpot inbound, that sort of thing. Maybe it's I think Michelle Obama did it one year. I don't mean quite that far, but something like that. Now, people pay thousands for this. Big companies like Salesforce have had, I think, Matthew McConaughey open at Dreamforce and things like that. Similarly, it doesn't have to be an A-lister literally, but a big shot, a big name. I've been to a virtual conference where Mark Cuban was talking, and his keynote obviously was the most registered for one. The chat was just electric. So playing on that, you've really got to look into their profile. You have to get in whatever agreement you're having with them explicit instructions that they have a certain amount of promotions that they must do. Otherwise, you're not getting what you need from it. Yes, you'll get probably the higher percentile of the people you have in your market when they see what you've got and it involves that person for sure. But the best of it comes from the new people because they have such profile. That's the main thing. Repurposing it again is obviously key for that because you're going to want to rinse and repeat as best you can what you paid for and the profile that that person gets, particularly because it's social media. If I've got Richard Branson, he's getting tagged in like 100 LinkedIn posts over the next year. Why would you not do that? Especially on YouTube as well, those types of things, Instagram, you can see how it becomes kind of viral. And if you want to go a little bit above and beyond, you can do maybe some PR, you can do a live stream announcement, make a big kind of announcement about it. Maybe you could do kind of movie trailer clips about it, of clips of that person speaking before and some ad roll, B-roll, all those things to make it look particularly cool. Optional extras, but it's a fun one to have in your back pocket, maybe for a later date. 10x bigger is something we probably don't do too often, but equally, I think of when I get to the end of the year, and I often say, what do we do for the like December webinar? Because it's always, well, do we do one on the first of the month or like halfway through? Because we're not going to get to it, are we? Because everyone's going to be off. What do we do? So this is a good thing you can try and tie in around those awkward months where there's holidays and like Thanksgiving and so on, where you've got that to contend with. This is something that's going to stand out a bit because most companies, we're always going to see that bit of a dip in and around those periods. And the webinar that kind of goes close to those holiday times, it will suffer. It's just part of it. But if you're going to go big, you might get bigger results, especially when everyone else is doing very standard stuff and the attention span is cut down around that time. So going a bit bigger, let's say it's similar to the ridiculous, similar to the big shot guest. It's similar to the journalistic effect. Just go full bigger. I mean, do the state of your market, do the state of the union, do the sponsors, the fallout content, do mini events that come leading up to this, do 10 blogs that lead up to it, do 5 ebooks that lead out of it. Now, this is a kind of a more vague one, and there's some stuff I mentioned there which we'll allude to in a minute. And briefly before we carry on, a couple of tools. So obviously we're here on Zoom. Basically the easiest way you could possibly do it I wouldn't say the cheapest. It might be the cheapest, but it's not far from it. Obviously, then at the bottom of the graphic there, you've got On24. It's probably the kind of HubSpot of webinar tools. There's so many of them that it would be a waste of time to try and put all of them on the slide. Different thing you can try though, Boomcaster on the left and Riverside FM are recording tools. So if you don't want to do it live like we are right here, you can pre-record and edit. If you did pre-record a Zoom, let's say my dog started to bark and Richard's carrying on talking, you can't edit that. But in a Boomcaster or a Riverside, you could mute me for that moment, or you could do a double take if I swore by mistake, whatever else, and then you could use a restream to broadcast that. So it gives you a bit more of a capabilities beyond and after the fact, but a bit more of a technical process. Riverside is great, as Jamal says. It's awesome. Okay, let's carry on. So some clever promos. This is where I have a lot more fun. Sponsored events. Now you might think, oh no, sponsored, we're not taking money. I don't actually mean that. So those of you who know of Vidyard, I first knew of this model when they did it. They had a virtual conference, which is basically a series of little webinars. They'd approached us as a lead sharing model to help them promote in exchange for obviously being on it. I spoke and moderated a session. But for every lead that you generated, you got back 2 plus the list that you got, because it's their form. They're going to see who registers, so we would know who of our list and our contacts showed interest in the session I was on. But I thought that was a pretty clever idea. I mean, no money exchanged. They did have a very simple contract. I don't even know if you have to do that. When I did this for virtual conferences and webinars, we didn't even need that. It was kind of gentleman's agreement, to be honest. But that's a really powerful one, especially if you have, like I did for Growth Month, the virtual conference that I ran about 2 years ago. We had 10 sponsors all on that model. It was 45 speakers, 44 sessions over 22 days, 2 sessions a day for a month. So the sponsors, they were littered out over the whole event. It didn't feel overly sponsor heavy. That sort of thing is all good fun. And of course, I got a lot of promo from them, and they got leads, which incentivized them. That's the main thing. Special guest events might be applicable, might not for some of you. But for instance, what we could have done for this one, if we'd have thought more about it, is let's say Seth Godin and Mark Cuban, we're not going to get them. But let's say we want to have them record a question for me and Richard to go through at the end here. We want to have them pre-orchestrated with a really difficult question about what we talked about. And what we do is we say to them, hey, let's record like a 1-minute video of you asking that question. We'll pull it up on screen right here and we'll broadcast it to you while we're doing it live. But that's an extra little promo where we can say, hey, you post that clip on this day with a link to register. We share maybe some of the leads or so on, or it's just good promo for them to be associated back with us. Maybe not for Mark Cuban and Seth Godin, but I think you get the point. I've done that plenty of times. And some pre-clipping a little bit, like I said before. If you ever watch the Diary of a CEO podcast by Stephen Bartlett, watch his Instagram. He does this very, very well. It's the best example I can think of. Movie trailers, basically, is what it is. There's some B-roll, pre-roll, and it'll be a clip of me going, this is the best webinar strategy in the world. And then it will cut away to something else I said, so that you're like, damn, I want to know what that was. And then you go ahead to promote the rest of the episode. In and after, and I know we're kind of coming up on time, so I'll breeze through. But in the webinar, what we haven't done for you today is say, here is some content that I think that you should download. Here is something recently published on our website. Here is the follow-up ebook that we have of the recording of this webinar. Here's the ABC XYZ 123. And afterwards as well, similarly, you got to think of that way before you do the webinar, way before you get on it right here. So for instance, when I do a webinar for a bunch of my clients and my work, what am I sending them after? Well, the recording pretty much every single time. But is there a related tangential piece of content? Is there like a blog that we have? Is there, if I read 5 frameworks out to you, what about the 6th one? Should I send you a video of that afterwards on Loom? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's the idea of, okay, I watched it. I was related to that. And now I'm relating to this next thing that's kind of tangential. And equally, if we have unanswered questions that we don't get to, make sure you come back to them, because otherwise the people who ask them don't come back, don't ask another question, and they're a bit upset. And that's not fun. So no one wants that.